Okay, let's dive into this. Because honestly, we've all been there. You start something brand new, and the dream just begins with so much hope. Maybe it's a new diet, some complex skill you want to master, that brand new YouTube channel with the shiny logo, or a book you swear you're absolutely finally going to finish. I mean, we all have that hidden graveyard of web domains we bought at 2 a.m., right? For a few days, or, maybe even a few weeks, you are fully committed. You're motivated, you're focused, you're excited. You can already visualize that future version of yourself, healthier, smarter, way more successful. But then something really small happens. You skip one day, you get a kind of disappointing result, or maybe an application gets rejected, and suddenly, without any grand announcement whatsoever, you just quietly pull away from the goal entirely. Welcome to This Explainer, where we're going to unpack the completely fascinating psychology of exactly why we ghost our own dreams.
It's a pretty powerful question, isn't it? Why do we do this? Look, if you've ever experienced this, I want to completely validate your experience right now. Take a breath, because you are so far from alone here. When you walk away from a goal like this, it isn't because you're inherently lazy. It really isn't. And it's not some official, dramatic failure where you stand up and declare, "I give up." Instead, it's more like an emotional disappearance. You didn't actually stop caring. Something inside you just quietly pulled away. There was no official decision to quit the whole shebang. You simply stopped showing up. It's almost as if you ghosted your own dream. And actually, this is one of the single most common forms of self-sabotage out there, just totally disappearing after a minor setback.
Let's map out exactly how this happens through what psychologists call the quiet fade. Now, if we zoom in for a second, notice how a tiny drop in momentum quietly starts to spiral. Objectively speaking, missing one single workout or just having one bad day, it means very little. It's a blip. But one skipped day quickly becomes 2. 2 days become 7. 7 days become 30. And then one day, you zoom out, you look back, and you realize you never actually officially quit. You just slowly disappeared. The goal faded away entirely just because that day-to-day consistency broke down. To really understand why this happens, we have to look at the psychological villains at play here. You see, the human brain rarely experiences failure objectively. It experiences failure emotionally. And emotions, well, they have a funny way of acting like a giant magnifying glass. Which brings us to cognitive distortion. This is when the brain takes a really small, isolated event and twists it into this massive, catastrophic emotional conclusion. So a tiny setback suddenly feels like hard, indisputable evidence that you aren't disciplined enough, or you're not talented enough, or you're just literally not meant for success. The failure itself isn't actually what hurts you. It's that hugely magnified emotional story your brain attaches to it. Think about how incredibly heavy this harsh internal monologue feels. This never works out for me. Through cognitive distortion, one tiny mistake, like one single rejected application or a video that gets way fewer views than you expected, transforms into a crushing, permanent verdict. One mistake turns into, "I always fail." One setback becomes, "This never works out for me." And just like that, suddenly the goal feels infinitely heavier than it did just a few days prior. Now, what's really interesting about this concept is how it totally flips our normal assumptions. It's completely natural to picture perfectionists as these highly organized, ultra-successful people with, color-coded planners and perfect morning routines. But in reality, a lot of people who abandon their goals are actually hidden perfectionists who secretly struggle to finish literally anything. Why? Because they aren't just chasing progress, they're chasing flawless progress. They crave absolute certainty. But here's the thing, growth never offers certainty. Growth is awkward. Growth includes mistakes, really embarrassing attempts, and flat-out bad days. So when reality gets messy, the hidden perfectionist interprets that normal awkwardness as a massive failure, and their motivation just completely collapses. And, quitting isn't always about weakness. Sometimes it's actually this fascinating biological shield, because your brain basically has one primary job, to keep you safe. Not to make you successful, but to keep you safe. And to your brain, failure feels like a massive emotional threat. It triggers all sorts of alarms: shame, embarrassment, rejection, disappointment. So when your brain puts its binoculars on and spots those uncomfortable feelings creeping in from a distance, it just decides, nope, let's avoid this situation entirely to protect ourselves. And it works. Kind of. Because when you avoid that threatening situation, you get this immediate hit of relief. You stop feeling the pressure, the vulnerability, and the disappointment right then and there. For a brief moment, it feels like the perfect solution. But that relief comes at an incredibly heavy price. Every single time you avoid a goal to escape those bad feelings, you're teaching your brain a deeply dangerous lesson. You teach it that escaping discomfort is a way better strategy than actually facing it, and you end up chaining yourself to this lifelong habit of avoidance. We really need to do some stark reframing here, because the exact type of emotion you feel after a setback absolutely dictates what you're going to do next. Listen to the sharp contrast between guilt and shame here. Guilt says, I made a mistake. Shame says, I am the mistake. This distinction is absolutely massive. Guilt is actually super helpful because it encourages correction. It makes you want to, pick up a wrench and fix the gears. Paralyzing shame, on the other hand, makes you want to crawl into a box and hide. People hide from situations that trigger shame. They stop creating, they stop applying, and they stop trying. And it's not because they don't care. It's actually because they care so much that the perceived failure feels totally unbearable. And that shame very often triggers what psychologists call the identity crisis. So many goals fail because they become way too deeply tied to our core identity. Imagine you're starting a new project. At first, it's just this fun little experiment, but eventually it gets personal. If the project succeeds, you feel valuable. If it struggles, you feel inadequate. The goal morphs from something you do into who you are. And now every small setback feels like a deeply personal attack. It's no longer, oh, the project didn't work. It suddenly becomes, I am not good enough. That is a crushing, incredibly heavy boulder to carry, so your brain naturally creates distance from the goal just to protect your identity. Which brings us to how we set our expectations in the first place. A lot of people believe that having super high expectations creates this magical, perfectly smooth road to success. But honestly, most of the time, they just create fragility. When you expect immediate, dramatic progress, like, say, massive fitness changes in a single month, every slight delay feels like hard evidence that something is terribly wrong. That is fragile motivation. It expects reality to perfectly match a fantasy. Now contrast that with resilient motivation. Psychologically resilient people literally expect a rocky path. They know the timeline is going to be completely messy. And that difference in expectation, it changes absolutely everything about how you handle a bad day. So the crucial point is this. The true difference between winners and quitters really isn't intelligence or talent or even luck. It's interpretation. Two people can experience the exact same setback. One person hits a locked brick wall, interprets it as absolute proof they can't do it, and sees a final verdict. The other person sees a stepping stone and realizes that failure is just feedback. Meaning shapes behavior. The most successful people aren't the ones who magically manage to avoid failure. They're the ones who recognize that failure is just information. It's just one messy chapter in the book, rather than the entire story. We need a massive paradigm shift here, because most people completely misunderstand motivation. They think they need to feel motivated in order to take action, so they just sit around waiting for inspiration to miraculously return. That is a total trap. After a setback, your motivation naturally drops because your brain wants certainty before it acts again. But here's the secret. Action actually sparks motivation, much like kindling a fire. The people who keep going are simply willing to act before feeling ready, just letting one small domino knock over the next. This is a real psychological skill you can learn. It's all about letting your consistency survive your emotional fluctuations. You really have to rely on the power of one workout, one page, one application, one video, just one attempt. And this brilliantly illustrates the real cost of walking away. The biggest, most hidden damage caused by repeatedly ghosting your own goals is broken self-trust. You literally stop believing your own commitments. You tell yourself, oh, I'll definitely start tomorrow. But deep down, you don't even believe yourself anymore. The only way back from that is repairing your internal credibility, step by tiny step. And you don't do this by making bigger, grander promises. You do it through tiny, kept promises. Stop making giant declarations. Just keep small commitments. Act before you feel perfectly ready. It's those small, everyday wins that actually rebuild your confidence. Listen, if you have ghosted a dream, a business idea, or even a relationship with your own potential, please take this to heart. You are not unusual. You are simply human. You just misunderstood failure and mistook a totally temporary setback for a permanent truth. So let me be very, very clear about this. Your worst day is not your identity. Those messy scribbles and crossed out plans you have, they are not proof that you're incapable. They are simply proof that you are still right in the middle of your story. You can always turn the page, because as long as you're alive, the story definitely isn't over. Which leaves us with this final thought to take away from our explainer today. Will you return one more time? Seriously, think about it. Your goal doesn't need a perfect comeback. It doesn't need flawless motivation, and it certainly doesn't require some dramatic cinematic transformation sequence. It really just needs one thing: your return. Even if it's awkward, even if it's messy, even if it's small. Because the people who eventually succeed are so often just the ones who stopped disappearing after small failures and simply chose to come back, just one more time.